The town of Cedar Ridge buried its secrets on a barren hill where the wind never stopped screaming. And that day, it was screaming for Sarah Henley. I stood at the back of the crowd, my hands raw from work, my heart numb from 15 years of silence. They were lowering a cheap pine box into the stubborn earth. Inside was a girl of 19, a stranger who drifted into town 6 months ago with nothing but a secret swelling under her dress. She died bringing two new lives into the world. Twins. Reverend Dawson was saying words, something about the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. But his voice was thin, snatched by the wind. The townsfolk huddled together, their faces hidden. They weren't here for Sarah. They were here for the gossip. Whispers slithered through the crowd like snakes in the dust. Poor little things. No father to speak of. What's to become of them? They meant the babies, a boy and a girl, lying in a basket over at the midwife's house. Mrs. Thompson, the woman who'd caught them as they came into this world, the same woman who couldn't stop their mother from leaving it. The moment the first shovel of dirt hit the coffin, the crowd dissolved. They turned their backs on the dead girl like she'd been a bad dream. Mayor Hutchkins walked past me, shaking his head. "Shame about that," he said, not even looking at me. "Thompson says the babes are healthy, but Lord knows what happens now." Mr. Garrett, the bank clerk, had the answer. "The county orphanage in Millbrook. That's where foundlings go." The mayor grunted. "Millbrook's a 2-day ride in good weather, and winter's coming." He didn't need to finish. Everyone knew about Millbrook. They called it the Angel Factory, a place where babies went in and angels came out. It was overcrowded, underfunded, and run by people who'd had the kindness beaten out of them long ago. The thought of it was a cold knot in my gut. I was the last one left on that hill, watching the gravediggers fill the hole. I hadn't known Sarah Henley. I'd just seen her in town, seen the same loneliness in her eyes that I saw in the mirror every morning. Maybe that's why I was here. Maybe it was something else. I walked back to town, my boots sinking in the mud. Cedar Ridge wasn't much. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, and at the far end, Mrs. Thompson's house. A crowd was already on her porch. The midwife stood in the doorway, her arms crossed like a fortress. She was a stout woman of 60, with iron gray hair and a face that had seen too much. "I've done my Christian duty," she announced to the crowd. "Kept them 3 days. Fed them goat's milk every 2 hours. But I have my own family. Someone else needs to step forward." Silence. Someone suggested the Millers. They'd always wanted kids. "Left for California last month," another voice shot back. "Couldn't make a go of it here." The crowd murmured, shifted, but nobody moved forward. Times were hard. A drought the summer before had left everyone scraping by. Children were a blessing, sure, but they were also mouths to feed, and these two came with nothing. I pushed through until I could see into the house. There, in a wooden crate lined with blankets, lay 2 tiny bundles. They were awake, their little fists waving in the air. Their eyes were unfocused, staring into a world that had already dealt them the worst hand imaginable. And something inside me, something I thought had died with my Martha and our stillborn son 15 years ago, twisted like a knife. "No takers, then?" Mrs. Thompson's voice was sharp with desperation. "If no one claims them by morning, they go to Millbrook." The Angel Factory. The crowd looked away, at their shoes, at the sky. Anywhere but at the 2 babies in the crate. Duty done, conscience clear. They'd shown up. They'd talked about it. Now they could go home and forget. But I couldn't move. Through the window, one of the babies started to cry. A thin, reedy sound that cut right through the wind and found every empty space in my soul. "You planning to stand there all day, Sam McAllister?" Mrs. Thompson's eyes were on me, sharp, accusing. She'd been there when we lost our boy. She'd been there when I lost Martha a year later. She knew the shape of the hole in my life. "Or did you have business here?" I took off my hat, turning it over and over in my hands. The felt was worn smooth. Could I see them?" Her face softened. "Just a little. Come in, then. But be quiet. They've just been fed." The house smelled of boiled milk and disinfectant. I walked toward the crate slowly, like they were wild things that might bolt. Up close, they were so small, so perfect. The boy had a shock of dark hair. The girl was nearly bald. Both had that wrinkled, reddish look of the brand new. Boy's the elder by 10 minutes, Mrs. Thompson said from behind me. Both got strong lungs when they want to use them. I reached out a calloused finger, and the little girl's hand wrapped around it. Her grip was surprisingly strong. And just like that, a dam inside me that had been holding for 15 years just broke. I thought of Martha, of the nursery we'd built, still standing empty, of the long silent nights with only the wind for company. I'll take them. The words were out before I'd even thought them. They just came out, like a breath I'd been holding for a decade and a half. Mrs. Thompson stared at me, her mouth hanging open. Sam, you can't be serious. You're a bachelor. You live alone on that ranch 5 miles out of town. What in God's name do you know about raising babies? Nothing, I admitted. The truth was raw in my throat. But I can learn. They'll have a roof. They'll have food and warmth. That's more than Millbrook can promise. The whole town will talk. A single man, taking in 2 infants. It's not proper. Let them talk, I said, my jaw setting. These children need a home. I have one. She studied me for a long, hard moment. I saw her weighing my broken past against their impossible future. Then she sighed, a sound that came from the bottom of her soul. Lord, help us all, she muttered. All right, Sam, but you'll stay here tonight. You'll learn how to feed them, how to change them. This isn't something you do on a whim. It's not a whim, I said quietly, my gaze still locked on the babies. The girl had fallen asleep, her tiny hand still clutching my finger. Her brother was making little cooing sounds. Maybe it was foolishness, maybe it was madness. But as I looked at the 2 small lives that had suddenly, impossibly, become my responsibility, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. These children, born in sorrow and abandoned by circumstance, needed someone who wouldn't turn away. And maybe, just maybe, I needed them just as much. The rain started again as evening fell, drumming a lonely rhythm on the roof. But inside, by the warmth of the stove, Samuel McAllister's first lesson in fatherhood was about to begin. 15 years late, but he had finally arrived. The ranch house was 5 miles from town, a lonely shape of wood and stone against an endless sky. For 15 years, it had sheltered just one man and his ghosts. Now it held 3 souls. I carried the babies inside, one in each arm, while the November wind clawed at the walls. I laid them carefully in the bed I'd made, a dresser drawer lined with my softest blankets, set right by the stove. They were exhausted from the wagon ride and didn't even stir. The silence was deafening. Just the wind, the groaning wood, and the impossibly soft sound of 2 infants breathing. The first night was hell. The boy woke first, his cry a sharp, angry demand. I fumbled with the bottle Mrs. Thompson had sent with me, spilling goat's milk all over my shirt. My hands, used to wrestling cattle and mending fences, felt like clumsy blocks of wood. Just as he settled, his sister started, a high, panicked wail that clawed at my nerves. It went on like that all night, a back-and-forth symphony of hunger and discomfort. By dawn, my eyes were burning, and my spirit was frayed thin. I'd moved Martha's old rocking chair next to their drawer. Sometime before the sun came up, with both of them finally quiet, I must have dozed off. In that half-sleep, I heard her voice, clear as a bell. You're holding them too tight, Sam. Babies aren't calves. They won't run off. I woke with a jolt. The little girl was watching me with dark, solemn eyes. Sunlight streamed through the curtains Martha had sewn, making dust motes dance in the air. The boy was still asleep, one tiny fist pressed against his cheek. Morning, little one, I whispered. Suppose you'll be wanting breakfast. This time the feeding went a little better. I remembered to test the milk on my wrist. I managed to burp her, feeling clumsy and foolish as a wet warmth spread across my shoulder. Another shirt for the wash pile. By the 3rd day, I had something that almost looked like a routine. Wake, warm milk, feed, change, rock, repeat. I was moving like a machine, powered by sheer necessity. The ranch was falling apart. Cattle needed tending. Fences needed mending. But every time I thought about leaving them to ride out, I'd look at their faces and stay put. This was my choice, my responsibility. On the fourth night, I broke. They'd been fretful all day, crying, refusing milk. The boy had a rash on his chest that sent a spike of pure terror through me. Near midnight, with both of them wailing and my head pounding, I sank into that rocking chair and did something I hadn't done since Martha died. I prayed. "Lord, I don't know what I'm doing," I said out loud, my voice rough. "These children, they need better than I can give. Show me what to do. Send help. Something." As if in answer, the girl's cries softened. I picked her up, holding her against my chest, and started to rock. Without thinking, I started humming an old hymn Martha used to sing. "Shall we gather at the river?" The baby quieted. Her little body relaxed against mine. Encouraged, I reached down with my free arm and scooped up her brother, settling them both against my chest. The old chair creaked as I rocked, humming that rusty tune. And a miracle happened. They both fell asleep. I kept rocking, scared to move, scared to breathe. In the dim lamplight, I studied their faces. They needed names, proper names, not just boy and girl. My eyes fell on Martha's Bible, sitting on the mantel where it had been for 15 years, gathering dust. Carefully, still holding the babies, I reached for it. I opened it to the family pages, where Martha had written our names in her neat, careful script. Samuel James McAllister, Martha Ann Williams McAllister, and below that, in a shaky hand, Baby McAllister, born and died November 20th, 1858. My finger traced the words. "He was here," she'd said through her tears. "He mattered." I turned the pages looking for something, for anything, and in Genesis I found them. Jacob and Esther, strong names, Bible names, names with history. Jacob, who wrestled with angels. Esther, who saved her people. Yes, these would do. Jacob and Esther McAllister, I said aloud. The words felt solid, real. My children. The next morning Jacob had a cough. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I bundled them both up and rode to town like the devil was on my heels. Dr. Morrison, gruff but good, looked the boy over. "Just a cold," he said, peering at me over his spectacles. "Babies catch things. You sure about this, McAllister? Taking on 2 infants alone?" "I'm sure," I said, though my heart was hammering with doubt. He nodded slowly. "Well, you'll need supplies. My wife has some books on child rearing. I'll have her send them out." On the way home, I stopped at the general store. Mrs. Garrett served me, her face a storm cloud of curiosity and disapproval. "Bottles," I said firmly. "Cloth for napkins, safety pins, whatever else babies need." She gathered the items in a stiff silence. As she tallied the bill, she couldn't hold it in any longer. "The whole town's talking, Mr. McAllister. A bachelor raising 2 newborns. It isn't natural. Neither is letting them go to an orphanage when there's a home waiting." I shot back, counting out the coins. The cost was staggering. It was money I'd saved for winter feed, but it had to be done. That night, with Jacob and Esther sleeping in a proper crib beside me, I opened Martha's Bible again. This time, I was the one who wrote on the family pages. Jacob Samuel McAllister, born November 17th, 1873. Esther Martha McAllister, born November 17th, 1873. Adopted by Samuel McAllister, November 23rd, 1873. I set down the pen. I had to learn about teething and fevers, first words and first steps. I had to be mother and father both, in a world that was just waiting for me to fail. But as I looked at my sleeping children, I realized something. I had lost my first family, and now I'd been given a second chance. I wouldn't waste it. As I watched them sleep, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, tucked into the folds of Esther's blanket. It was a small silver locket on a delicate chain. It must have belonged to their mother. I picked it up. It was tarnished but well made. I pressed the tiny clasp, and it sprang open. Inside there wasn't a picture. There was a tiny, intricate engraving. A family crest, it looked like. A shield with a lion and a serpent. And beneath it, a single ornate letter. It wasn't an H for Henley. It was a C. What did it mean? Who was Sarah Henley, really? I had a feeling the whispers on that barren hill were only the beginning of the story, and the trouble was just getting started. 3 weeks later, the trouble arrived in a buggy pulled by a fine-looking horse. I was outside trying to wash a mountain of soiled napkins, with Jacob on one hip and Esther sleeping in a basket. The woman who climbed down from the buggy was dressed in dark blue wool, far too fine for Cedar Ridge. "Mr. McAllister?" Her voice was crisp, educated. "Eastern." "I am Margaret Sinclair. Sarah Henley was my cousin." The world tilted on its axis. Mrs. Thompson had said Sarah had no family. "Miss Sinclair," she corrected, pulling off her gloves with sharp, precise movements. "And Sarah wouldn't have mentioned me. We had been estranged. I only learned of her death through a letter." Her eyes locked on Jacob, and her gaze was hungry. It made the hair on my neck stand up. "These are her children." "They're my children now," I said, my voice low and steady, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. "May I come in? We have matters to discuss." I led her inside, suddenly aware of the chaos. Bottles on every surface, napkins drying on chairs, the faint, sour smell of milk. She didn't seem to notice. Her focus was entirely on Jacob. "May I hold him?" I hesitated, then carefully passed him over. She held him with a practiced ease that sent a chill down my spine. "He has the Henley nose," she murmured. Then she looked up at me, her eyes like chips of ice. "Where is the girl?" I moved to stand in front of Esther's basket, a human shield. "Miss Sinclair, why are you here?" She sat down in Martha's rocker without being invited, still holding Jacob. "I've come for the children, of course. Sarah may have died in unfortunate circumstances, but these babies have family. Proper family." "They have family right here," I said, my voice hardening. "The town recognizes me as their guardian." A cold smile touched her lips. "By what authority? Do you have legal papers? A judge's decree?" "I think not. You are a stranger who took advantage of a tragedy. I appreciate your charity, Mr. McAllister, but it is no longer required." The old, stubborn anger I thought had been buried with Martha rose up in me. "With all due respect, Miss Sinclair, where were you when your cousin was pregnant and alone, washing clothes for pennies to survive?" A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Sarah made her choices. She left a respectable home, threw away her future for—" She stopped, composing herself. "That is in the past. What matters now is the children's welfare." "Which is why they're staying here," I said. She stood abruptly, handing Jacob back to me like he was a sack of flour. "You think you can raise 2 infants alone? A man with no wife, no experience? The town must be scandalized." "The town's opinions don't keep babies fed at 2 in the morning." She pulled a letter from her handbag. "I've already been to town, Mr. McAllister. I've spoken with Mayor Hutchkins. I've retained a lawyer from Millbrook. I will be filing a formal petition for custody. The law is quite clear on these matters. Blood relations have the stronger claim." My heart felt like a stone in my chest. "The law also considers the children's welfare, and I'm the one who's been providing it." Her eyes narrowed. "You speak as if a few weeks of caretaking erases blood ties. These children belong with their mother's family, where they can be raised properly. The girl especially needs feminine guidance." "Their mother's family that cast her out?" My voice was quiet, but it cut like a razor. For the first time, a flicker of real emotion crossed her face. "We did not cast her out. She ran away. She was headstrong, foolish. She thought she was in love with a traveling man who filled her head with promises of a new life. When my father forbade the match, she left." "And you didn't look for her," I finished. "I won't debate the past with you," she said, her armor back in place. "I am here to correct a mistake. These children will have every advantage with me. Education, society, a proper inheritance. What can you offer them? A failing ranch and the life of a hermit?" I looked down at Jacob. Esther was starting to stir in her basket. "I can offer them a father's love." "You are not their father," she snapped. "You are a lonely man trying to fill an empty house." The words hit their mark, but I didn't flinch. "Maybe so, but I'm the one who stayed when everyone else walked away. I'm the one walking the floors at night. That has to count for something." She paused at the door. It counts for kindness, Mr. McAllister. But kindness is not kinship. The hearing will be in the spring, when the circuit judge arrives. Until then, I suggest you don't get too attached. After she left, the house felt colder. I rode over to my neighbor Tom Wheeler's place. He was the closest thing I had to a friend. Legal trouble, he said, pouring me a whiskey. Blood kin counts heavy in a courtroom, Sam. A wealthy woman from the East against a bachelor rancher? That's a hard fight. I can't lose them, Tom. It would be like losing Martha all over again. You could marry, he said, practical as ever. A wife would even the odds. I just shook my head. What woman would have me, with a ready-made family and a heart full of ghosts? Riding home under the cold stars, I felt a deep, chilling despair. She was right. I was just a lonely man. What could I offer them? Back home, I checked on the twins. Jacob's hand was resting on Esther's arm, even in his sleep. I touched each of their small heads, memorizing the feel of their soft hair. Then I remembered the locket. I pulled it out, studying the strange crest in the lamplight. A lion, a serpent, and the letter C. Sinclair started with an S, Henley with an H. This didn't fit. Who was the man Sarah had run away with? The man Miss Sinclair had mentioned? She'd said he filled her head with promises. Was this his crest? Was C his initial? If Miss Sinclair was their only living relative, then the law was on her side. But what if she wasn't? What if their father was still out there somewhere? A man with an even stronger claim than hers. A man who might be even worse. I had until spring, until the judge came. I had to find out who Sarah Henley really was, and what secrets she'd carried to her grave. Because I had a terrible feeling that the fight with Miss Sinclair wasn't the real storm. It was just the rain before the hurricane. The Cedar Ridge courthouse smelled like old hay and desperation. When Judge Crawford arrived for his spring circuit, the whole town packed into the converted barn to watch the show. I sat on a rough bench, Jacob and Esther in a basket at my feet. My one good suit, the one I'd worn to Martha's funeral, felt like a cage. On the other side sat Miss Sinclair, cool and composed next to her lawyer from Millbrook, a man named Weatherby, whose polished shoes seemed to mock my muddy boots. This hearing, Judge Crawford began, his voice like rocks grinding together, will determine custody of the minor children, Jacob and Esther, born to one Sarah Henley, deceased. Weatherby stood up, smooth as silk. Your Honor, the case is simple. My client, Miss Margaret Sinclair, is the children's maternal cousin. She is their blood. She offers them a life of refinement, education, and financial security in Baltimore. Mr. McAllister, while well-intentioned, is a stranger, a bachelor of limited means with no experience in child-rearing. The judge looked at me. Mr. McAllister, do you have representation? No, sir, I said, standing up. Just myself. Then speak your piece. I cleared my throat, my heart hammering against my ribs. Your Honor, I've been their father in all but blood for 4 months. I was there when no one else was. I've fed them, clothed them, and cared for them. Weatherby scoffed. 4 months of charity, Your Honor, does not erase a lifetime of kinship. The judge turned to Miss Sinclair. Tell me about your cousin, Sarah. Sarah was like a sister to me, she said, her voice full of practiced sadness. She made a youthful mistake, eloping with an unsuitable man. Pride kept her from coming home. I seek only to make amends by raising her children as my own. What was this man's name? The judge asked. Miss Sinclair hesitated. His name was Charles Carmichael. He was a gambler, a drifter. He abandoned her soon after they left. Carmichael, the C on the locket. The pieces were clicking together, but they were forming a picture I didn't like. And you, Mr. McAllister, the judge said, turning his hard gaze back to me, what can you offer these children? I looked down at the twins. Esther was starting to fuss. Without thinking, I reached down and lifted her onto my lap, where she immediately quieted, her small hand gripping my finger. I can offer them a home, Your Honor. Maybe not a fancy one, but a safe one. I can offer them my name and a father's love. Can you offer them financial stability? Weatherby pressed, moving in for the kill. I understand your ranch is heavily mortgaged, Mr. McAllister, Is that correct? I manage, I said through gritted teeth. He manages by the skin of his teeth, Weatherby declared, while my client can provide for their every need. Just then, Jacob started to cry from the basket. Juggling Esther on one knee, I leaned down and picked him up with my other arm. I held them both, bouncing them gently, and they settled against me, content and secure. A voice from the back of the courtroom muttered, "Seems natural enough to me." It was Mrs. Thompson, but Judge Crawford was frowning. "Mr. McAllister, the court must consider the long term. A single man raising two children, especially a girl, it presents complications." "Then let us address those complications." The voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. It was Tom Wheeler, my neighbor, and behind him stood Dr. Morrison and his wife, and even Reverend Dawson. Tom strode forward. "Your Honor, Thomas Wheeler, Mr. McAllister's neighbor. I've watched that man these last months. I've seen him sell his best bull just to buy supplies for those babies. I've seen him work his ranch by moonlight so he can be with them during the day. If that's not a father, I don't know what is." Dr. Morrison stepped up. "As their physician, I can attest they are thriving, healthy, well-fed, and clearly loved. Removing them from Mr. McAllister's care would be detrimental to their well-being." Then it was Mrs. Morrison's turn. She held a thick law book. "Forgive me, Your Honor, but I was a school teacher before I married. I've been reading territorial law. The precedent in Carson versus Bellwether states that when a child has been abandoned and a bond has been formed with a subsequent caregiver, that bond must be given equal, if not greater weight than a simple blood claim." Miss Sinclair shot to her feet. "This is absurd. I am their family." "It does matter," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the silent courtroom. "But so does being there. Where was their family when Sarah was sick and alone? Where were you when these babies came into the world with no one to claim them?" I looked straight at the judge, holding my children tight. "I'm not their blood. That's a fact. But I'm the one who knows Jacob sleeps best on his stomach and Esther likes to hum when she drinks her milk. I'm the one who promised them they would never be alone again. That has to be a fact, too." The courtroom was still as a tomb. Judge Crawford looked from me to Miss Sinclair. Then he asked her a simple question. "Miss Sinclair, Mr. McAllister has named the children Jacob and Esther McAllister. If you were granted custody, would you keep those names?" She looked confused. I suppose I would give them proper family names, Sinclair names." The judge nodded slowly. He was quiet for a long, agonizing moment. "The court recognizes the complex nature of this case," he said finally. "Blood ties are significant, but so is the bond of love and devotion. To remove these children now from the only parent they have ever known—" "Your Honor," Weatherby protested. "I am ruling," the judge said, his voice like iron. "The court finds that the best interests of the children are served by remaining in the care of Mr. Samuel McAllister." A gasp went through the room. I felt dizzy with relief. "However," the judge continued, and my heart stopped, "this custody is conditional." Conditional. "You will submit to monthly visits from a court-appointed observer, Mrs. Morrison if she is willing, and Miss Sinclair will be permitted to visit twice yearly and correspond with the children. Any sign of neglect, any hint of impropriety, and this case will be reopened." Miss Sinclair's face was a mask of cold fury. As the courtroom erupted in noise, she walked over to me. "This isn't over, Mr. McAllister," she whispered, her voice venomous. "I'll be watching. I will find a reason, and I will be back." She swept out of the courthouse, a storm cloud in fine blue wool. The townspeople crowded around me, slapping my back, but I barely heard them. I had won. But it wasn't a clean victory. It was a truce. I was a father on probation. Miss Sinclair had lost the battle, but she fully intended to win the war. As I headed home with the twins, a new cold fear began to creep in. I'd learned their father's name was Carmichael, a gambler, a drifter. What if he was still out there? What if he heard about the children? A man like that wouldn't care about love or devotion, but he might care about the Sinclair family's money. He might see the twins not as children, but as leverage. I had saved them from the orphanage. I had saved them from Miss Sinclair, but I had a sickening feeling the real fight for my children hadn't even begun. The man who rode up to my ranch on a sweltering July afternoon looked like a vulture in a black coat. The twins were 8 months old, playing on a blanket on the porch, and the world felt almost peaceful. Then he appeared, his expensive horse moving with a slow, predatory grace. Everything about him, from his cold eyes to the way he surveyed my property, screamed danger. I stood up, instinctively placing myself between him and the children. "Mr. McAllister," he said, dismounting. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Cornelius Blackwood. I believe we have business to discuss." "Don't know you," I said, keeping my voice level. "No, but you knew Sarah Henley." He pulled a sheaf of papers from his saddlebag. "Or rather, you are caring for her children. Children who, I'm afraid, come with certain encumbrances." My jaw tightened. "State your business." Blackwood's smile widened. It was not a pleasant sight. "Very well. Sarah Henley owed me a significant sum of money. $300 to be precise, borrowed against a future she never lived to see. A legal debt, properly documented." He held out the papers. I didn't take them. I was looking at the signature at the bottom. It was shaky, desperate. "Ordinarily," he continued smoothly, "such a debt would die with the debtor. However, the law is quite clear. When there are inheritable assets, the debt must be settled." "The children have no assets," I said flatly. "Their mother died penniless." "Ah, but you're mistaken." His gaze drifted to Jacob and Esther, who had stopped playing and were watching him with wide, solemn eyes. "They have potential, strong, healthy twins. The right family might pay a handsome price for such children. Consider it recovering my investment." The blood drained from my face. "You're talking about selling my children." "I'm talking about settling a lawful debt," he corrected. "Unless, of course, their current guardian wishes to assume the obligation himself." $300, Mr. McAllister, plus interest. Let's call it an even 400. Pay me, or I will petition the court to seize the children as assets." Behind me, Esther let out a happy gurgle. The sound was like a knife in my gut. "The court gave me custody," I choked out. "The court was not aware of this prior financial obligation," he purred. "A debt of this nature supersedes a simple custody arrangement. Ask any lawyer." He gestured toward the twins. "Charming children. They'd fetch a fine price in Denver. Perhaps I'll sell them separately. Maximize the return." "Get off my land," I snarled, my voice a low growl. He just smiled, put on his hat, and mounted his horse. "You have 30 days, Mr. McAllister. After that, the children are mine. Good day." I watched him ride away, a storm of fury and sheer terror raging inside me. $400. It might as well have been 4,000. That night I spread my accounts on the table. The numbers mocked me. After court costs and supplies, I had $43 to my name. The ranch was mortgaged to the hilt. The bank just laughed when I asked for a loan. They said Blackwood had already paid them a visit, warning them not to do business with me. He had me in a cage. On the 10th day, Mrs. Morrison came to visit. "I've heard about your trouble, Samuel," she said, her face grim. "That man Blackwood is a blight on this territory." She hesitated. "There might be a way. My cousin in Millbrook, she and her husband are wealthy. They've been trying for children for years. They would pay the debt and give the twins a good home." It felt like she'd punched me in the stomach. "You're saying I should give them up?" "I'm saying you should consider what is best for them," she said gently. "Sometimes love means making the hardest choice of all." After she left, I sat on the porch and watched the sunset bleed across the sky. The thought of this house falling silent again, of empty arms and an empty future. It was a pain worse than death. That night I tried to write a letter to Miss Sinclair. Circumstances have forced me to reconsider. But I couldn't do it. I crumpled the paper and threw it in the stove. There had to be another way. The next morning, an old Mexican man named Pablo, who sometimes traded goods in the territory, appeared at my gate. "Senor McAllister," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "I hear you have troubles." News traveled fast. "I do." "I have a proposition," he said. "My nephew in Mexico, he needs good American breeding stock. The market there, it pays in gold, not paper. Far more than you would get here." My pulse quickened. How much more? Perhaps $500–600 for the right animals. But it is a dangerous journey. Bandits, the desert, federales. Not a trip for a man with a family. A dangerous journey versus certain loss. It wasn't a choice at all. I found Mrs. Thompson and begged her to watch the children. She was reluctant, but she agreed. "You better come back alive, Samuel McAllister," she'd said, her eyes stern. "Those babies need you." The night before I left, I held Jacob and Esther for hours, memorizing the weight of them in my arms, the smell of their hair. "I'll be back," I whispered into the darkness. "I swear on your mother's soul, I'll be back." The journey south was a nightmare. We lost cattle to rattlesnakes and bad water. We fought off bandits in a rocky canyon, the canyon echoing with the sound of gunfire. Pablo took a bullet in the arm, and I had to dig it out with my knife by the light of a campfire. But he was right about the market. The Mexican rancher paid in gold coin, $520. I clutched the heavy leather pouch like it was my own heart. The ride back was a frantic, desperate race against the calendar. 29 days, 30 days. Every sunrise was a turn of the screw. On the afternoon of the 30th day, I crested the final hill overlooking my ranch, and my blood ran cold. Blackwood's expensive horse was tied to the porch rail, and beside it stood the sheriff's buggy. I was too late. I spurred my horse, my heart a cold, dead stone in my chest. I burst into the house, the bag of gold clutched in my hand. Blackwood was there, holding a crying Esther in his arms. Jacob was kicking and screaming at his legs. The sheriff and Mrs. Thompson stood by, their faces grim. "Ah, McAllister," Blackwood said with a dead smile. "You've returned just in time to say goodbye." "Put her down," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "The 30 days are up. The debt is forfeit. The children are my property now, to dispose of as I see fit." "No," I said. I upended the leather pouch onto the table. Gold coins spun and glittered in the afternoon light, a cascade of suns. $400, I said, my voice clear and cold, "for the debt, and another 20 for your trouble. Our business is concluded." Blackwood's eyes widened. He stared at the gold, then at me. For a moment I thought he would refuse, would argue. But greed won out. He dropped Esther, just dropped her, and lunged for the table. I caught her before she hit the floor, pulling her and Jacob into my arms. The sheriff watched, his face disgusted, as Blackwood greedily counted the coins. "A pleasure doing business with you, McAllister," he sneered, scooping the gold into his bag. "No," I said, holding my crying children. It wasn't. That night I burned Blackwood's cursed debt papers in the stove and watched the ashes float up the chimney. We were safe. For now. I had faced down the vulture and won. But as I held my children, a new, unsettling thought took root. Where did a penniless girl like Sarah Henley meet a man like Cornelius Blackwood? How did she get into a debt of $300, a fortune on the frontier? Blackwood was gone, but the questions he left behind were like ghosts in the house. The story of Sarah Henley was deeper and darker than I'd ever imagined. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that her past was not yet done with my children. Winter came early and hard that year, burying the prairie under a blanket of white. The twins were 14 months old, walking, exploring, and getting into everything. Jacob could climb out of his crib. Esther had figured out how to unlatch the kitchen cabinets. Leaving them alone for even a minute was a recipe for disaster. And the barn roof had a leak, a bad one. The winter hay, our lifeblood, was getting damp. I had to fix it. "All right, helpers," I said, bundling them into so many layers they looked like little round bears. "Papa needs a hand today." I fashioned a sling and strapped Esther to my back. Jacob went into a big basket I secured near the base of the ladder. They thought it was a grand adventure. The work was brutal. Ice coated every shingle. The wind cut through my coat and tore at my skin. My hands, already chapped raw from washing baby things, split open and bled in the cold. Every few minutes I'd climb down, check on the twins, warm their hands, give them a sip of warm milk. By noon my back was screaming from the weight of Esther. Jacob was tired of his basket and wailing, and I was only halfway done. Samuel McAllister, what in the Lord's name are you doing? I looked down. Mrs. Morrison was there in her buggy, her face a thundercloud of disapproval. Roof needs fixing, I called down, feeling like the biggest fool in the territory. Get down from there this instant. When I was on the ground, she took in the whole scene. My bleeding hands, the shivering twins, the half-mended roof. This is what I was afraid of, she said, her voice sharp. You cannot do it all alone, Samuel. Pride goeth before a fall, and in your case it could be literal. Give me those babies. My own pride, stubborn and stupid, rose up. I couldn't ask. You're not asking. I'm telling. She was already unstrapping Esther from my back. I'll watch them at my house. And when you're done, we are going to talk about getting you some proper help. With the children safe, the work went faster. But by the time I finished, I was exhausted down to the bone. Back at the house, I slumped into a chair. I was one accident, one illness, one bad storm away from disaster. Mrs. Morrison was right. I couldn't do this alone. But I couldn't afford to hire help. It was a cage with no door. 3 days later, there was a knock. A young woman stood on my porch. She was maybe 20, with native features, dark, steady eyes, and worn but clean clothing. Mr. McAllister, she said, my name is Mary Crow Feather. Mrs. Thompson sent me. She said you might be needing help. My first instinct was to say no. The town already talked enough about me. Bringing a young Indian woman into my house? It would set tongues wagging from here to Millbrook. But there was a quiet competence in her gaze that stopped me. I can't pay much, I said. Room and board, and a small wage is all I ask, she replied. I'm good with children. I raised my younger brothers and sisters. Why here? I asked, suspicious. Her jaw tightened just a fraction. Town folk don't much like hiring my kind. You need help. I need work. It seems simple. And it was. And it wasn't. Having Mary in the house was strange at first, but she was a miracle. She handled the twins with an easy grace that left me in awe. She sang them old crow songs and their giggles filled the house. For the first time I could work the ranch knowing my children were safe. The house became cleaner, the meals became better, and the crushing weight on my shoulders began to lift. The town talked, of course. Mrs. Garrett at the general store made snide comments. I ignored it, but I noticed Mary's trips for supplies grew shorter and shorter. One evening, I found her on the porch, staring out at the snow. Trouble in town? I asked. She shrugged. Mrs. Garrett suggested I might be more comfortable working somewhere else. Anger, hot and sharp, flared in my chest. You're welcome here, Mary. The twins, they love you. We need you. A small, sad smile touched her lips. I know. Your children, they don't see my skin. They just see Mary. It's been a long time since anyone looked at me like that. As the winter deepened, trapping us inside for days on end, I learned her story. Her father was a white trapper, her mother a Crow woman. She'd been caught between two worlds her whole life, belonging to neither. These little ones, she said one night, watching Esther toddle toward her. They'll know that feeling too. No real ma. Raised different. The world can be cruel to children who don't fit. They'll be strong, I said, like you are. Something passed between us then, a quiet understanding. We were both outsiders, building a life on the edges. The real test came in February. A blizzard hit without warning while I was checking the far pastures. I was trapped in a line shack for 3 days, sick with worry. When I finally made it back, I expected to find chaos. Instead, I found the house warm, the animals fed, and Mary calmly making breakfast while the twins played by the fire. We were fine, she said simply. They asked for their papa, though. Just then, Esther toddled over and wrapped her arms around my leg. Papa home, she said. Papa stay. I picked her up, my heart overflowing. I looked at Mary over Esther's head. Thank you. It's my job, she said. It's more than that, I replied. You're family now, if you'll have us. Her dark eyes widened slightly. Then slowly she nodded. Family, she agreed. When spring finally broke, it found a different ranch, a different family. The house was filled with laughter. The twins were thriving, learning words in both English and Crow. But I couldn't shake the feeling that our peace was fragile. It was the calm before the storm. In April, a letter arrived. It was postmarked from Baltimore. It was from Miss Sinclair. Mr. McAllister, it read, as per the court's decree, I will be arriving in June for my semi-annual visit. I trust you will have the children ready. The letter felt like a threat, but this time I wasn't as afraid. Let her come. Let her see what we had built. A home, a real family, held together not by blood, but by something stronger. But one night, as Mary and I were talking, she mentioned something that turned my blood to ice. Before I came to work for you, she said, I would see Sarah Henley in town sometimes. She was always alone, except once. Once? I asked. Yes, I saw her talking to a man in a fine black coat. He was smiling, but it was a wolf's smile. I remember thinking he looked like a vulture. Blackwood? Cornelius Blackwood had been here, in Cedar Ridge, while Sarah was still alive. Their connection wasn't just a simple debt. It was something more, something darker. Miss Sinclair was coming, and I had a terrible feeling that the past she was about to walk into was far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. The secrets buried on that barren hill weren't staying buried anymore. They were clawing their way out, and they were coming for us. The riders came at dawn. It was a Sunday in late May. The prairie was green, the air was sweet, and for a moment you could almost believe in peace. I'd taken the twins, now 2.5, down to the creek. Mary was in the house making breakfast. The first gunshot shattered the morning. I grabbed the children and ran. 3 riders were circling the house, firing into the air, whooping and hollering. Drifters, scum, the kind that preyed on isolated ranches. I recognized the leader, a bearded man named Cole McBride. His gang had hit the Sadler place last month, burned it to the ground. Mary! I screamed. She was already at the door, my rifle in her hands, her face a mask of calm determination. Get the children to the root cellar, she said, her voice steady as rock. I'll hold them off. You can't. Go! She was already raising the rifle. I dragged the terrified twins to the cellar behind the house. It was small and dark, but it was safe. Stay here, I ordered them. No matter what you hear, you stay quiet. Jacob was crying, clinging to my leg. Papa's scared. Papa's going to protect you, I said, kissing them both. Be brave. I barred the door and ran for the house, grabbing my shotgun. Mary was firing from an upstairs window, her aim precise and deadly. She wasn't trying to kill them. She was trying to warn them. McBride rode closer, his face a cruel sneer. Nice place you got, farmer. Make it easy on yourself. Give us what we want, and we'll leave you breathing. Get off my land, I yelled back. He laughed. Tough talk for a man with a couple of brats to protect. Yeah, we seen you with 'em. Where'd you hide 'em? Mary's rifle cracked. Dirt exploded by McBride's horse, and the animal reared. That's close enough, she called down. McBride's face darkened with rage. An Indian, he snarled. You got yourself a squaw. Well now, this just gets better and better. He turned back to me. Last chance, farmer. Put down the guns, bring out the gold, and maybe we won't burn you out. Mary's next shot took off a piece of his ear. He screamed, a high, thin sound of shock and pain. You'll pay for that, he roared, and all 3 of them opened fire. The house exploded in a shower of splintering wood and shattering glass. I fired back with the shotgun, the kick of it a brutal comfort. Mary's rifle kept up a steady rhythmic crack from upstairs, pinning them down, keeping them from rushing us. But we were outnumbered. Our ammunition wouldn't last forever. Then I smelled it. Smoke. Thick, acrid smoke. One of them had gotten to the barn. The horses, the hay! Mary cried out. Let it burn, Yoster shouted back. Stay at your post. The world narrowed to the thunder of guns, the smell of smoke, and the constant cold terror of what was happening to my children, huddled in the dark. A bullet grazed my shoulder. Another tore through my thigh. The pain was distant, unreal. Then upstairs, Mary went quiet. Mary, I screamed, up my heart seizing. I'm here, she called back, her voice strained. Running low on bullets. McBride was laughing from behind the well. Getting tired in there? How long before that squaw of yours runs out of fight? How long till we find them kids? I made a decision. A desperate, foolish gamble. "Cover me!" I yelled to Mary and slipped out the back door. The smoke from the burning barn was my only shield. I circled around, shotgun in hand. One of the raiders, a young kid, was watching the front of the house. I came up behind him and brought the butt of the shotgun down hard. He crumpled without a sound. One down. The second man saw me. He got a shot off that burned across my ribs, but my return fire was true. He went down, screaming. That just left McBride. He was still behind the well, protected. I was out of shotgun shells, down to a pistol I'd taken off the kid. The angle was bad. It was a stalemate. And then I heard it. More horses, coming fast. My heart sank. Reinforcements, it was over. We were dead. But the riders who crested the hill weren't raiders. They were wearing badges. Sheriff Patterson and a posse, drawn by the miles-high column of smoke from my burning barn. "Drop your weapons!" Patterson bellowed. McBride made a run for it. 3 rifles spoke at once, and he went down, clutching his leg. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I staggered out from cover. Mary appeared in the splintered doorway, her sleeve soaked in blood. But she was standing. Our eyes met. "The children," she breathed. We ran. We tore open the cellar door. Jacob and Esther were huddled in the darkest corner, their faces streaked with tears, but they were unharmed. They flew into our arms, their small bodies shaking. "Papa hurt," Esther whispered, her tiny finger touching the blood on my shirt. "Papa's fine," I said, holding them so tight I thought my heart would burst. "Everyone's fine now." As the sun set, the neighbors helped us put out the last of the barn fire. Mrs. Morrison was there, tending to our wounds, clucking over us like a mother hen. The captured raiders were tied up, waiting for the wagon to jail. I sat on the damaged porch with Mary. The twins, with the incredible resilience of children, were already playing in the yard. "You saved us," I said quietly. "Your courage. That shooting." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's what family does." I looked at her, really looked at her, her face smudged with soot, her arm bandaged, her eyes steady and clear. In the heat of the battle, some final wall between us had crumbled to dust. "Mary," I began, my voice rough, "the town talks about us. I don't care about them. Today proved we're partners, in every way that matters." I took a deep breath. "I can't imagine this life without you in it. Will you marry me?" A slow smile spread across her face. "Are you asking me to be your wife, Samuel McAllister?" "I am. Badly, I know." "Yes, Samuel," she said, her voice soft. "Yes." A few weeks later, another buggy crested the hill, but this one was elegant, expensive. It was Miss Sinclair. She stepped down, her face a mask of polite inquiry, and surveyed the scene. The bullet-scarred house, the blackened skeleton of the barn, me with my arm in a sling, Mary standing beside me, and the twins running to hide behind Mary's skirts. "Mr. McAllister," she said, her voice cool, "it seems you've had some trouble." "We managed," I said. Her gaze fell on Mary, taking in her native features, her steady presence at my side. A flicker of something, disdain, surprise, crossed her face. Then she looked at the children, hiding behind the woman she would surely see as an unsuitable guardian. "Indeed," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "it appears my visit is more timely than I could have possibly imagined. The judge will be very interested to hear about all of this. The violence, the instability." She smiled, a thin, cruel slash in her perfect face. "The hearing to reopen the custody case will be arranged at once. This time, Mr. McAllister, you will not win." She thought the raid was her weapon, her key to taking my children. She had no idea. The raid hadn't broken us. It had forged us into something she could never understand. Something unbreakable, and she was about to find that out the hard way. The courthouse was packed again, but this time the mood was different. It wasn't curiosity. It was a low, angry hum. The story of the raid had spread through the territory, and the townsfolk who had once whispered about me were now firmly on my side. Miss Sinclair sat with her lawyer, Weatherby, looking confident. She saw a bullet-scarred rancher, a half-breed woman, and a burned-out barn. She saw instability. She saw her victory. She was blind. Your Honor, Weatherby began, we are here because the conditional custody of these children has been flagrantly violated. Mr. McAllister's home is not safe. It was attacked by violent criminals. He and his associate were injured. This is no environment for children. Judge Crawford looked at me, his face grim. Mr. McAllister, what say you? I stood up, Mary at my side. Your Honor, my home was attacked. That is true, but we defended it. We protected our children. Safety isn't about having walls that never get scratched. It's about having the courage to stand between your family and the danger. And that's what we did. A noble sentiment, Weatherby sneered, but the fact remains they were in mortal danger. And who protected them? A voice boomed from the back. It was Sheriff Patterson. He strode forward. Your Honor, I led the posse to that ranch. What I saw was not instability. I saw heroism. I saw a man and a woman fighting side by side against impossible odds to protect their own. If not for Mary Crow Feather's marksmanship, they might not have held out until we arrived. Miss Sinclair's eyes widened. This wasn't going according to her plan. Furthermore, I said, looking directly at her, this incident has clarified many things for me. Life is fragile. A family needs a foundation of law as well as love. That is why 3 months ago, Reverend Dawson joined Mary and I in marriage. A gasp went through the courtroom. Mary put her hand on my arm. We are a family, Your Honor, and I am formally petitioning this court for my wife, Mary McAllister, to legally adopt Jacob and Esther as her own. Weatherby was sputtering. This is an outrage, a desperate ploy. Is it? Judge Crawford said, leaning forward. He looked at Mary. Mrs. McAllister, do you wish to be the mother of these children? Mary's voice was clear and strong, ringing with a truth that silenced the entire room. Your Honor, they have been my children in my heart since the first day I held them. This is just about letting the paper match the truth. Then the final blow. Your Honor, I said, pulling a letter from my pocket, Miss Sinclair has spoken of what is best for the children. I agree, which is why I believe you should see this. I handed the letter to the bailiff, who gave it to the judge. This letter arrived yesterday, I explained. It is from a law firm in Denver. It seems a man named Charles Carmichael, the twins' biological father, heard about the raid. He also heard that the children have a wealthy relative in Baltimore. He is now threatening his own custody suit unless a significant financial settlement is paid to him to relinquish his claim. Miss Sinclair went pale. He is a gambler, I continued, a drifter, a man who abandoned their mother, a man who now sees his own children as a payday. Is that the world you wish to drag them into, Miss Sinclair? A world of blackmail and greed? Because that is the world that is attached to your money, not mine. I turned to her, my voice dropping. Out here on my ranch, they may have faced danger, but they also have love. They have community. They have 2 parents who would die for them. With you, they will have a target on their backs for the rest of their lives. So you tell me, which world is safer? She stared at me, her perfect composure finally cracking. For the first time, I think she saw the truth. She didn't see a future for the children. She saw a commodity, a way to ease her own guilt. She stood up slowly. Her lawyer tried to stop her, but she waved him away. Your Honor, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I withdraw my petition. She walked out of the courthouse without another word. Judge Crawford looked down at the adoption papers, then at us. A rare small smile touched his lips. Mr. and Mrs. McAllister, he said, and the sound of those words was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. It is the judgment of this court that the best interests of these children are served by this adoption. The records will show Mary Crow Feather McAllister as their legal mother. The gavel came down. The sound was like a door slamming shut on the past. That night, our friends and neighbors came out to the ranch. They brought food and fiddles. We had a party under the stars, right there on our bullet-scarred porch. Tom Wheeler had already started rebuilding the barn, calling it a wedding gift. As the party wound down, I found Mary on the porch, watching the twins sleep on a blanket. I've been thinking, she said softly, about their names. They should carry all of who they are, not just McAllister, but Crow Feather too. Jacob Samuel Crow Feather McAllister. Esther Martha Crow Feather McAllister. Let them carry both our strengths, she said. I pulled her close, my heart full to bursting. Yes, I said. That's right. Later, as we tucked the children into their beds, Jacob mumbled, half asleep. Mama, story. Mary sat on his bed, her voice a soft hum in the darkness. Once, and she began, there were two babies born in a storm. They had no mama, no papa, just each other. But a lonely man with a good heart said, I will be your papa. And a woman who didn't fit anywhere said, I will be your mama. And together they fought off monsters and vultures and ghosts, and they made a family. Good story, Esther murmured from her bed. Mary kissed them both. The best story, she whispered. I stood in the doorway, watching my family, my wife, my children. We weren't a family born of blood. We were a family forged in fire, built from broken pieces into something stronger than steel. We had taken the sorrow of a barren hill and turned it into a home. The lonely ranch house was no longer silent. It was filled with love. And we knew no matter what storms the future held, we would face them together. Thank you for listening to this story from the heart of the American West. Every family has a story of how it was forged. I'd love to hear a piece of yours in the comments below. Where are you listening from today? Let's connect. And if you enjoyed this journey with Samuel, Mary, and the twins, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Your support helps us keep these stories from the frontier alive.